Will you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So Joshua tells the Israelites, "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." I think it's probably much easier for us in this modern day to say, "As for me and my household, we will get our yard in shape. As for me and my household, we will give a bag of food to the food drive. As for me and my household, we will try to be better at recycling. As for me and my household, we will put 10% of our income into savings and give to others." Now, I like the phrase that Joshua uses today. "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord," because Joshua is putting the Lord first. He is also making serving the Lord, serving God, as a goal in the future. Just like you would make a goal of graduating from school, spending more time with family, exercising, and those things. So how often do we make a goal of always worshiping God or worshiping God in the future? Joshua knows that serving the Lord will be a central part of his life for all time. We so often list all the things that we need to do, often good things, and then at the end we say, "Oh yes, and I also worship God and I follow Jesus." As if our faith is the bow that ties everything together, or as if it's the icing on the cake. But it really should be at the beginning, at the center of our lives. And I don't know about you, but I don't think it's natural for us to automatically go to God first in all things. We have to work at it. There are so many things in the world to entice us. So many things that seem like they'll give us a quicker lift or a quicker way to our goal. Working on our faith and going to God is not always the fastest route. And we see temptations everywhere that stray us from God's path. Whether we see that as just our own nature, as evil, or as Satan, we know there are many things that can take us off the path of serving the Lord. Now Joshua, today we heard about Joshua. And let me remind you who Joshua was. Joshua became the leader of the Israelites after Moses died, and he was actually the one that brought the Israelites into the promised land. You see, God got mad at Moses, and Moses didn't get to complete the job. So today, Joshua has been through a lot. They are a time of covenant renewal. And a covenant is an agreement, a promise between God and God's people. And it's a sacred promise that was handed down to Noah after the flood, that God would always love us and care for us. So the Israelites are now in the promised land, and Joshua is the head honcho. And this was the land that was promised to Abraham by God. And if you read all the chapters before this in Joshua, a lot has happened. First of all, before the book of Joshua, the Israelites were wandering in the desert for 40 years, and a lot happened there. And then, if you read the book of Joshua, you will see that all the chapters have to do with conquering the lands that God promised to the Israelites, and how God divided the land to the 12 tribes of Israel. So after all of this activity and this busyness in life, the people need a refresher course. They need to be reconnected to God and to stop for a moment. Like any group of people, the Israelites, or the people that Joshua are ruling, have a lot of history. Some of that history is good and some of it is not. And whether history is to be repeated is the choice of the current generation. So Joshua says to his people, "I know that your ancestors worshiped those other gods in the foreign lands that were beyond the river Jordan. So it's your choice." You notice in the passage, Joshua gives the people a choice. Joshua says, do you choose to follow the God of Israel? Or do you want to follow those other gods that are maybe a little more flashy and tempting and don't require a lot of work like the God of Israel? It's up to you. So the people respond, far be it from us to follow those other gods. Our God freed us from slavery and brought us out of Egypt. And then Joshua, I think, was sort of testing him. He says to the people, you can't serve God. The God I'm talking about is a jealous God, and he will not forgive you if you decide to worship those other gods. But the people say, no, we want to worship God, the God of Israel. So Joshua responds, okay, put away your foreign gods. They must have had something lying around, some idols or something. Put away your foreign gods and worship the God of Israel. And at that point, the people say, the Lord our God we will serve, and him we will obey. And Joshua at that point makes a covenant, a promise with the people, and gives them the statutes and the ordinances, or in other words, the structure for how they need to serve the Lord. Now we need to remember, when we read the Old Testament, this is a very old document, written in a different culture and time. And the Israelites had been wandering the desert, and it was a very volatile time. And so being given structure and a set of rules to follow would have been a very comforting thing. But you'll notice, as I said, that God, or Joshua, they both give the Israelites permission to choose who they want to worship. But God, the Israelites realized, gave them many precious things. God gave them their freedom, their strength, and God gave them what really matters. So how does this relate to us? The Old Testament sometimes can seem very distant and foreign, but there are many things that we can grab onto and where God is speaking to us. So we too, as Christians, in the year 2011, have a choice of how we will dedicate our lives and to whom we will dedicate our lives. Will we follow the way of God, or will we follow our own self-absorbed vision of the way things should be? And I think in our modern context, and in the context of our denomination, the United Church of Christ, that respects other world religions, that the gods that Joshua speaks about with the lowercase g are not necessarily gods that we would think of today as different religions or different gods. The foreign gods that I think we struggle with are those temptations that can get in the way of faith. Those idols that we can give our devotion to but are based on conditions. Let's say status, pride, wealth, power. These can all be gods with a lowercase g or idols. And all of those things are not evil in themselves. But when they are worshipped like gods with a lowercase g, then we are in trouble. Status, pride, wealth, power, all these different things that are in the world that we see every day can be used for good if we use them with the hands and the heart of Jesus. If we put Christ first, if we put God, our Creator, first, then we can work for good in this world. The idea that following our God is a choice is something that I like. It's very fitting for this day and age when increasingly numbers of children grow up with really no faith experience at all. And then we have a whole group of folks that perhaps grew up in the church and had a bad experience, they felt rejected, or they felt like they didn't fit in, so they drifted away. And there's many other different places in between, I think. But in these cases, and in many cases, people in the year 2011 are choosing to say, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And when we choose it ourselves, when it's not forced on us, when it's something that where we want to be, it can be a life-changing experience. And granted that we can't always, in our workplace or in certain situations, go up to our neighbor sitting next to us and say, as for me, we serve the Lord. But how can we put that into practice every day in our interactions with everyone? So you know the expression that actions speak louder than words. I think we can apply that to this statement as well. So let's just think about it. Imagine out there in Tulare and Visalia, wherever you live, let's think about a few examples. Imagine a child helping another child by choosing to be her friend. And this little girl, this little girl who's sitting all alone, is being picked on by bullies. But the child that we are speaking about wants to be her friend and doesn't care what other people say. That little girl is living the phrase, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Imagine a woman who is close to 100 years old, greeting everyone who comes into her church, giving them a big hug, and seeing the child of God in each of them. I wonder, do you know who I'm talking about? And although she has very little financial resources, she gives to her church and to her community. She is living the phrase, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Think of the diligent church officer who spends hours a week doing behind-the-scenes work that takes patience, time, and energy, and is barely recognized if things are going right. That person lives by Joshua's phrase, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Think of an adult who reaches out to a young person with more struggles than you could ever imagine. A child that comes from a home where love is not expressed and needs a mentor to guide him through basic steps in life. That person is living by the phrase, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Think of the person who keeps a prayer list on paper or in his or her head and diligently prays for those people at some point every day, knowing that God is listening. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. We serve the Lord, our household, our church serves the Lord when we share the story of Jesus Christ to our children, to our adults, and to those that we have just met. When we share the story of Jesus, who tells us to be humble, we are blessed. And we are reminded that blessed are the poor in spirit, the peacemakers, the pure in heart, and the merciful. And through the sacrament of communion, we relive the night when Jesus gathered with his friends, his helpers, his followers. We remember time and time again of why we choose to serve the Lord. Will you please join me now on your insert, which is in your bulletin. God be with you.
God also with you.
Lift up your hearts. Let us give thanks to God Most High.
It is right to give God thanks and praise.
Eternal God, who created the heavens and the earth, giving breath to every living thing. We thank you for all the gifts of creation and for the gift of life itself. We thank you for making us in your own image, for forgiving us when we act as though you have no claim on us, and for keeping us in your steadfast care. We rejoice in Jesus Christ, the only one eternally begotten by you and who was born of your servant Mary, and shared the joys and sorrows of life as we know it. We remember Christ's death, we celebrate Christ's resurrection, and in the beloved community of your church, we await Christ's return at the end of history. So we remember that on the night of betrayal and desertion, Jesus took bread, gave thanks to you, broke it, and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, Jesus took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me.